Ty můžeš vypnout zvuk z tohohle, já bych mu zavolal, ať jsme připraveni. No, že...
Je to napsaný na programu.
Na programu je to napsaný, ale mám
Vidíš tam teda sleva, Studio1. A slyšíš tam nějaký zvuk?
Test, zdravíme slévárnu. Halo, raz, dva, zkouška. Zdravíme slévárnu. Halo.
Není afterparty?
Strese? Nie. Môžem si niekoho predstaviť? To je typek, ktorý...
Hi.
What was your name?
Charlie.
Charlie, this is Yurai. Charlie had this game theory workshop today, and yesterday before yesterday he wants to come visit Bratislavska Polis for the opening. So what date is this one? Just last weekend of
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Dám mu tvoj kontakt.
Yeah, we are doing really good. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Sorry, I was trying to close the other applications and I closed this one. Okay. Great. 1 second. Sorry, I have. I'm closing my applications. Okay. Just I hope it won't close this one. Okay. No, it did not. Okay. So you can see me?
Yes, we can see you now. Can you see
great.
us? Okay. So I would like to welcome you. For the audience, I would like to welcome Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
For those of you who don't know Nassim Nicholas Taleb, he spent 21 years as a risk taker, a quantitative trader. He is an author of a multi-volume essay called Incerto, which consists of The Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness, Anti-Fragile, and Skin in the Game. And he will talk about skin in the game and how it affects us and why it is important. He's also one of the few people that understand decentralization. So when you talk to him, he's one of the few people that actually gets the idea and knows why it yields to better results. And we will have plenty of time for questions and answers. So welcome. And
Thank you very much. I just finished, I actually completed, not just completed, but published the book Skin in the Game. And of course, I'm dealing with the after effect of having a book out, namely having to explain it. And every time I talk about it, I talk about something else. So it appears that the idea is universal enough for to affect many things, many things. Okay, so let me start from the beginning with the notion of skin in the game, but I'm not going to use the classical route using the ethics, the symmetry, anything. I'm just going to use a very simple, a very simple metaphor, that of the restaurant business. A friend of mine, like me, a trader, when he retired, we all of us end up retiring because it burns you out. It's sort of like your life running fast forward. It's very hard. So you want to have a real life and invest in businesses. So he decided to start losing his money in the restaurant business. Okay. And one piece of advice: don't invest in the restaurant business. Eat in restaurants, though, but don't invest in the restaurant business. And so there is in the restaurant business a tradition of awards. The #1 sushi place in New York, the best place in the Lower East Side, the best, tuna with music, the best. So they have all these categories and all these awards. And at the year end, so they grant the awards throughout the year, and at year end, there is a gala dinner. And guess what? Very few restaurants that got awards made it to the gala dinner. The restaurants were bankrupt before. So what does this tell us? Okay, it is a very strong principle, and we can use it for a lot of things. That the restaurant, as a restaurateur, you're not in the business of being judged by other restaurateurs. That's the wrong format. You're judged by people who eat there. You're not judged by surveys. You're not judged by journalists. Okay, the journalists, that present awards and grant them. You're not judged by a government. You're not judged by anyone. You're just probably one single person matters in that business is your accountant. Okay, you want to make sure your accountant is happy. But basically, these businesses only survive when they have good rapport with their, with their clients. And what comes out of it, that any kind of institution or institutional framework or any system where people are judged by peers and not by the end product or by reality, these will fold, will disappear. So if I write, this is the US version of it. Okay, I write for my readers. Okay, I don't write for other authors or to impress journalists or impress other people. If I did, it probably would be okay in the beginning, but can't survive for long. Now, from here, we can understand a lot of businesses and a lot of what I call pseudo-expert situations. In the Black Swan, I spoke about pseudo-expert in economics. A person who typically works for government, he or she produce forecasts with impunity. Basically, they get rewarded because they publish in journals. There's circular things, but there's no contact with reality, and the thing keeps going. And I said, this is a pseudo-expert problem. Later on, I refined it, and we're going to see the link to decentralization by saying that whenever you're in a macro business, you can BS. In other words, it's much easier to macro BS than micro BS. Micro is macro. And you understand from there immediately that macro is very bad because centralization has ill effects. How? Think about it. When people supposedly now there's a rebellion against experts, but I've never seen anybody doubt the expertise of a butcher or a plumber or a dentist or a sound technician dealing in this room, with my lecture here, or someone who makes computers. Of course, these are experts, and nobody doubts it. Nobody doubts that the pilot has expertise. But we definitely doubt if civil servants have expertise, or we definitely doubt that economists have expertise. Why? Well, it's a simple problem. It's like in the restaurant business. Whenever you're judged by your peers, that system rots, becomes circular. You need to be judged by your end product, by contact with reality. So that's the notion of skin in the game, is contact with reality makes you learn, and it's a good filtering. It filters people who are like restaurants that are not good, go bankrupt from contact with reality. And when you have government institutions, this is why you can understand that what we have to, in common is some form of dislike of institutional top-down framework and like organic bottom-up. Because top-down framework, they make decision without skin in the game, without benefits from the decision. So that's the main idea. But again, it translates into risk business. So let's see how it developed in the risk business. Without skin in the game, you're going to have a category of people who will inflict risk on others without paying the price themselves. And I call that in a book the Robert Rubin trade. Robert Rubin was a vice chairman of Citibank, a former government official. He was part of the tribe, and they reward you with a good job if you do a good job. Banking, if you serve the banks, later on you get a bribe to get a good job there. So Robert Rubin pocketed $120 million over 10 years from Citibank in compensation. When Citibank went bust, he didn't have to pay a penny. And of course, Citibank went bust because of the policies he advocated. He kept his money. He didn't show up to work with a check. So what was going on there? There's an asymmetry. When you make money in that industry, you keep it. When you lose money, you distribute it to society. You push it onto others. Hence, because you don't have skin in the game. So the principle in skin in the game is that of symmetry. He or she who makes the gains need to make the losses, to bear the losses, bear the risk of the decision. So that is the concept of symmetry that has prevailed in Western society, or actually in civilization, since the beginning of civilization. Because the first law that extant today that we found is the Hammurabi's Code. And what does Hammurabi's Code tell you? It says that if an architect builds a house and the house collapses, even much later on, okay, because visibly the architect can use cheap material, you see, and hide the risk, then the article is accountable for that house collapsing. So if someone is killed, the architect is, put to death. If someone's injured, the architect needs to pay a price. So, and what does this do? It prevents people from being separated from the effect of their decisions on others. So there is asymmetry. So the notion of skin in the game is about that symmetry. Well, as it started with Hammurabi, and of course it developed eye for eye. It's a symmetry. Actually, eye for eye is to limit. In other words, you're not responsible much more than an eye, and it's metaphorical, because if you look at it up in the Talmud, you realize that eye for eye, it doesn't have to be literal, because a blind person, okay, if someone has no eyes, a blind person then can blind others with impunity. No, it doesn't work that way. But the whole concept is that you shall not get the upside without bearing some of the downside. So you have to have that symmetry. So, and continue, society was based on it, okay, until recently. We started having what we see in Washington is warmongers, people who push a button, decide on destroying Iraq, Libya, in the name of some principles, and they think that these principles are very valuable, like democracy and stuff like that. I said, I love democracy, but you don't want to kill 1 million people, and then say, hey, we brought you democracy. So it's completely ludicrous that these people do not pay the price of their mistakes. And guess what? I mean, they stay in office and they come back, and no matter whether it's Democrat, Republican, they're still there, and they keep, helping these decisions. And they don't learn. Why don't they learn? Absence of skin in the game. Because systems, to understand evolution, systems do not improve because systems do not learn because their members learn. Systems learn by destroying those who don't have the proper traits. That's how systems learn, by removing bad element from the system. And there is a symmetry in nature. And let me explain how, with a simple example. When you drive on a highway, say you drive on a highway around you, okay? You hardly ever see, there's a very, very low rate of nuts who can kill 30, 40, 50 people, because it doesn't take much to kill 30, 40 people on a highway. All you have to do is go in reverse and drive against traffic. Now, why doesn't it happen often? Why do we have such a low rate of rogue drivers? Why? Well, it's very simple. Because they have skin in the game. And people are in the cemetery. Because if you inflict risk on others, you see, and you bear the same risks, all right, those who are foolish with risk-taking will end up harming themselves as well. In other words, you cannot harm others with impunity for a long time. For the first time, our society has a class of people who can harm others without bearing the risk, whether financial or whether it is actually physical. In Skin in the Game, I have that. I look at historical situations, and you realize that nobody had a high rank in society without taking risks. Whether in some societies, the merchants, okay, had to take risk. You could not, operate commerce without you're forced to take risks. You could not transfer risks on others. Bankers could not transfer risk to the state. And warmongers, like Roman emperors, 75% of Roman emperors died either in battle or in, killed by others, or suicide, committing suicide because they're going to be killed. 2/3 explicitly, and then the rest we suspect didn't really die in their bed. It was poisoning. And had they lived longer, maybe 100% of Roman emperors would have died a violent death. So you realize that in the past, warmongers took more risks than others. Just like fast drivers take more risks than others because you drive faster. So therefore, they're more likely to be eliminated, and that establishes symmetry in society. So warmongers, like Hannibal was first in battle, Napoleon, always more exposed than others. And the idea in England, in UK, but particularly England, that the notion of a lord has to take more risks than others when there's battle. And that's why he is a lord, or she is a lord, or member of such a prominent family. You have to take more risk, otherwise you're not a lord. And they had to, when the last war that the UK were involved in the Falkland, directly involved in, they had to make sure that the royal family took more risk than others, because that was the tradition. Now this is gone, with people causing wars and then going to the ranch in Texas, okay? This is gone with people, journalists deciding on invading Iraq and then continuing to work for the New York Times and advising people to do the same because they don't learn. There's no mechanism of learning. That's the idea of skin in the game. Now we can translate the idea of skin in the game. I mean, you can take it in a lot of directions. It can be metaphysical. We can talk about religion. That religions never like the absence of skin in the game. They want you to commit sacrifice. They don't want you to just, use religion when you want. You have to do something. And the whole idea of Christianity is based on the Christ not being God, because God doesn't have skin in the game, can't suffer. The Christ had to suffer, so he has skin in the game. So it was real. It was not just like an acrobat who had a parachute. It was actually exposed to the risk and suffering. And likewise, religion wants you some commitment. And in the past, you could not love the gods without some kind of skin in the game, without paying, by giving, sacrificing meat to the gods. So that was, you can't do something without putting some cost into it. In other words, you can't have a free ride. That's notion of skin in the game. And so in the beginning, I started with a notion of the restaurant to just tell you that you don't learn, okay, from peers, you learn from contact with reality. And of course, any system where you have peers judging peers is going to be a problem. Now comes the idea that our friend just presented, centralization. What's the connection? Well, it's very simple. Take Switzerland, the best organized democracy in the world. People take decisions at a local level because you live in a community. You have skin in the game. You have family in a community. You have friends in a community. You're part of a tribe. That's part of you, that community. And that community, okay, will judge you if you make a mistake, or you feel guilt if you make that mistake. Now think of an environment that's maximally centralized, and say bureaucrats in Washington, there's some decisions that are maximally centralized. Well, these people are facing an Excel spreadsheet. So they're not like being judged by Excel spreadsheet. They're not paying the price for being wrong. Or another situation, for example, in the EU, where people, just bureaucrats, when they get together, they start doing things, that, just transferring it's like the architect in Babylon could not transfer the risks, you see, could not walk away from the risk, but bureaucrats today can walk away from the risks that they've caused, you see. Just walk away, that's it, or anonymize the decisions. There is, I checked in the UK system, they make sure that the minister, is to blame, but not the real people running ministries are not political appointees. They are effectively the unelected officials, and these people try to anonymize the decisions so you can't really track them later. That's what happens when you have centralized system. But in a decentralized system at a commune level, people have skin in the game, and actually even showed some behavior. When the community is small, the fractal relations built from small communities, at different layers getting together, like small towns in a county, and the counties together in a state, and a meta-state, and so on. That fractal relationship works much better than putting everybody in one soup, and what I call is bogus universalism. And it was shown, for example, that if you have 300-400 fishermen, they tend to behave in a very, very communitarian way. They don't overfish. They know the game. Okay. Same thing with the communities of farmers. Okay. They don't really. They know how to share resources, and they know how to preserve the properties of the collective. But then when you make it very big, it'd be like Soviet Union. Each individual's on his or her own. And then their objective is to try to beat the system. So there's what we call scale transformation, how people behave differently at different scales. And why small villages cannot be big towns. You have to actually build big towns with small villages, not like just transform one small village into a big town. That's scaling. All these things can be explained by many phenomena, but skin in the game is always behind these things, because skin in the game is what allows evolution to work. So before we finish and take a Q&A in about 2 or 3 minutes, I would like to give a few counterintuitive images of what skin in the game can lead to. And one of them that most people like, little vignette is that of the surgeon. Okay, if you show up at a hospital and you have the choice between 2 surgeons of equal rank, one surgeon looks like what Hollywood would pick if they had to put a surgeon in a movie. Gold rimmed glasses, nice behavior, perfect upper class accent, like educated American English or British upper class accent, speaks in beautiful sentences, fit, sort of not, gray hair, not ugly looking, but not, like looking like a playboy, that kind of person. Or the other surgeon, you have to, brain surgeon that you have to choose, he looks like a butcher. Okay. Now, which one would you pick? The one who looks like, what Hollywood would pick as a surgeon, or the one who looks like a butcher? Okay. The point is, remember, you're not being judged by Hollywood, okay? You're judged by reality. Conditional on these two people being at the same rank at, the hospital, odds are that the one who doesn't look the part, the surgeon who looks like a butcher, is the one who's more competent. Thanks to skin in the game, because visibly, there is performance. And this person was able to overcome his lack of, appropriate appearance. You see, the fact he doesn't look the part, okay, was a handicap. So, as a general rule in life, whenever a system has skin in the game in it, never pick the person who looks the part. So pick the surgeon who looks like a butcher, not the person who looks like a surgeon. Likewise, I discuss business plans. Any business plan that looks like a business plan, it's someone's trying to make money from you because it's slick marketing. You see? So you pick a business plan if you want to invest that does look like a business plan. As a matter of fact, or even better, invest without a business plan. Even better, okay? Like in my business of trading, if you have two traders, one who can speak very well and explain the ideas, and the other person, is cryptic, you don't quite understand, pick the one who's cryptic. Conditional on both of them being successful, the one who's cryptic and difficult, can explain himself very well, odds are he or she is the one who knows, what to do. So this is the general idea that I presented. And I would love to have a, like 20 minutes or so, whatever, however length you'd like, a Q&A around these points. And it's always more lively. Because I have skin in the game, I prefer to have contact with you than just talk for hours. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for listening to me.
Thank you. So I have a first question. You are speaking to an audience that is in a place that accepts only cryptocurrencies and runs only on cryptocurrencies. And yes, when we started doing this 5 years ago, people said it's not possible because it's too volatile. And after attending your mini certificate in a real world risk, I view it as okay, but I can see the risk, and with the stable government money, there's probably some hidden risk. So my first question is, how do you view this difference between like this search for stability versus the volatility that is probably natural in the world?
Okay, so one thing I said about cryptocurrency, because I thought about it quite a bit, I cannot predict, but there is one central value in cryptocurrencies, is the fact of having a currency without a government, an organic currency. What gold wanted to do, and sort of like it worked for a couple of 2,000 years, 3,000 years, and sort of like failed because somehow it got crowded out by top-down currencies. And so a distributed currency vastly outperforms a managed currency from the top. Okay, just like anything that is distributed works better. I mean, we know that. Nothing ever started from the top worked for a long run. Sometimes it works because the state puts resources, but it doesn't really work. Now, the question of currencies, you have no skin in the game on the part of policymakers. What they want to do, what Greenspan wanted to do, is basically just look good. So he resigns and goes and plays tennis in Florida. He was in love with tennis, so and that's it. It was get all the medals you can collect, and then go down, and once in a while come to Washington for a big gala dinner. That was his aim, and of course he stuck us with a lot of risk. He created smooth stability, and he didn't pay for the risks. That fellow was an idiot who followed him, Bernanke, did even worse. Bernanke wrote on a great moderation, had not seen the risks in the system accumulating. He even, proclaimed there's no more risk anymore, playing, the Greenspan game. So visibly he was incompetent. And guess what? We had a crisis, and they called on him to solve the problem. I mean, it's sort of like someone who crashed the bus or didn't see the risk is coming in. So visibly you cannot rely on bureaucrats to do anything, okay? Practically any system that has bureaucrats can do anything. So we need something else. Now, the idea of cryptocurrency is wonderful. Now, the point is which cryptocurrency, okay, it's going to take a while because the thing is we just have a few years of track record to find the stability. But there is something going for the cryptocurrencies that is what I call Lindy. And let me explain Lindy and why it goes with time. The Lindy effect is as follows. There's a restaurant called Lindy that had supposedly a big cheesecake. It was a horrible cheesecake. And it closed down the day my book was published, right? In which I discussed the Lindy effect. And what the Lindy effect was, it was called after Lindy, it was this following effect. It's actors on Broadway, because the restaurant was near Broadway, would come and discuss, the plays. And they discovered that a play that had 100 days, been survived for 100 days, had at least 100 more days of, life. 200 days, 200 more days of life. So life expectancy of plays, up to a point, of course, increased with time. Okay. So, and this tells us something about technology. It tells us that the technology that are older have a huge advantage because the new technologies will come and go, but those that are old have survived, odds are will stay. Okay. So now let's say, what is the most Lindy in transactions? Well, the most Lindy in transaction is this notion of letter of credit. Okay. That is very, very old in the sense that I would deliver merchandise to you. It activates a financial transaction. So in other words, in return. So you see the idea that you are bundling the currency with the merchandise. So, and let me tell you why we needed that. The system in the past, the traders were Phoenician because Phoenician had family members, all right? So the minute I deliver something in Spain and Cadiz, it triggered the liability entire Phoenicia, and of course they have family. You cannot really. They only traded within family members because the grandfather or the mother or the mama, would come in and yell at you for having ripped off your brothers. So you had to deliver. So there's some kind of trust that came from families. But sometimes in Florence, 500 years ago, they created the following product that effectively helped a lot the Medici family. Is I deliver merchandise to you and you sign that receipts of merchandise, you see, that becomes, you're paid, I'm paid by your signature. I have a letter of credit that's negotiable. So therefore, we needed something like that, and people had the currency without a transaction attached to it. Now we can do that with cryptocurrencies, you see, that idea of letter of credit, and that is very Lindy. So that's the first thing going for cryptocurrencies, is that I can, send you a book, and the minute the transaction is bundled with the financial transaction is bundled with the physical transaction. Okay, that's the first one. The second thing about the currency is there is a huge advantage to having anonymous currency. Okay, you see. And visibly, you can't carry dollar bills, and you can do that with cryptocurrencies because the whole idea is you don't want governments to come and mess with you. So long as you pay your taxes, you just want to keep, you don't want people to know what you're doing. It's your right, okay? And the third aspect of currency is that at no time in history did people trust government, okay, in issuing a currency. There's only one. I mean, let me tell you, just a very simple example. You take the Christ in a temple. There were money changers in the temple. Why were they money changers? Because God refused any currency that was not the shekel of Tyre. Because he didn't trust people, because typically government would always debase their currency. That you cannot do it. And governments always, what they do is, hey, you know what? We debase by 1%. Nobody notices when you debase by 1%. And then you debase by another 1%. And after a while, it's debased. And there's only one government at a time of Christ that did not debase his currency. Okay? and God only accepted in that currency. Can you believe it? So you have money changers. So the idea is that a cryptocurrency cannot be debased. There are a lot of problems now we have to work around. I mean, I remember, and I'm using my laptop now, okay? But I remember how a laptop looked like. It was something completely unusable. I mean, there's like the weight of a suitcase, all right? I remember my Osborne went up. I mean, many people here were not born when I was using the first laptop. It was not usable, all right? Now, of course, now cryptocurrency is going to look not usable, all right? It is where the cracks are, but look how encouraging it is to see that we have the ability as citizens to bypass governments by telling governments, I want you to do things government should be doing. I want safety, I want order, right? But please don't mess with currencies, but it has not been your thing, right? Currency is not your thing, you're telling governments. Currency is our thing, individual. That is what's central, okay, in this, is that no bureaucrats can really run your life. And actually it's quite necessary now more and more, because I don't know that some countries, some bureaucrats are advocating the elimination of physical currency. Okay, I mean, and they could probably do that because governments print the currency, they can eliminate it. Okay, they can say, oh, it's only credit cards, so we can monitor you better. This is where we need a decentralized system of anonymized transaction, except without the downside of anonymization. Now, are we there yet? I don't know. But the point is, let's not be discouraged. We're going to have a lot of failures. See, but eventually, what we're already seeing with cryptocurrencies is the huge effect it had on central banks who are no longer, I mean, the Bernanke putting interest rates at zero artificially just to enrich the banks is something that can only happen in a system where bureaucrats have taken over.
Yes, thank you. Do we have another question from the audience? If not, I have one more. So do you have any good ideas for strategies to deal with volatility in life? Some not necessarily hedging strategies, but like how to deal with volatility, not necessarily related to cryptocurrencies, but could be as well.
Okay, I mean, any system that does not have some amount of moderate volatility collapses. So there are two types of systems that are volatile, as they say in Latin, fluctuat nec mergitur. They fluctuate, but they, look at nature. Nature has some induced volatility because you have seasons. If you didn't have seasons, it'd be very complicated to run nature because season is what allows for evolution. And likewise, when you try to eliminate the business cycle, you have bad companies accumulating. And think about, what happens is that the longer you wait for the first recession, the worse it gets. So it's better to fail early. So it's nice to have a volatility of early failure. And I'm sure everybody here in the tech business understands early failure, although it's not an idea that's, Europeans are yet in love with, whereas in America, we accept failure because that's a business. I mean, you fail, it's better to try and fail than not try at all, okay? And otherwise go become a bureaucrat where they don't fail, okay? So that's all right. So they're a different culture. So what I'm saying, so you have to have some volatility in your own life. And I, since writing Anti-Fragile, which is about that, I started looking at medicine and effectively the same idea of convexity, that systems have convex responses, can be applied to figure out what systems like more volatility or less volatility. My central book remains Anti-Fragile. Okay? The notion of anti-fragile is starting to spread now. That the system, if you deprive it of volatility, becomes very weak. And you have to find the amount of volatility. Now, volatility can be at many levels. The first one is fluctuation in the stock market. They're good for companies. People don't realize that, okay? If you want no stable price, go to the Soviet Union. I mean, recreate Soviet Union, some people like that, okay? Not many, but few. You need volatility in your own health, okay? If you don't have cold and hot temperatures, okay, a lot of bodily functions degrade. So you age faster. So use a sauna and a cold shower, right? Something, or stand out in Prague, stand out in the cold every day for 5 minutes. Chronic cold kills people. Acute cold actually makes them live longer. You see, so that this is your system is not going to be weakened but strengthened by it. Don't go to the gym, do intense exercise rather than diffuse exercise, for example. All right. Intermittent fasting, instead of having the same amount of food all the time, lump it. Okay, intermittent fasting. That's one other example. And then you can see what system likes this volatility. Now there's an equation. Whenever the response is convex, okay, you like more volatility. And I present it in a seminar. It's hard to present like this, but that's the main idea. And sort of like wrote technical papers in medicine based on it. So the idea is embrace the volatility that will not kill you. You see?
Hello. Hi. Thank you for your wonderful insights. I have two quick questions. One, with your expertise for so many years as possibly one of the best traders in the history of US, do you think we are in the worst situation economically than we were in 2008? If you compare what's happening to Argentinian peso, Venezuela, Zimbabwe situation, Turkish lira, Brazilian economy, Indian rupee going down by almost 10% this year for the first time. Are we really in the worst situation than 2008 and all the banks and governments are trying to hide their best? That's one. And second is, what do you think of the ETF being pushed onto cryptocurrencies starting from Bitcoin? Is that good news, bad news? What's your view on the same?
Okay, so I'm going to answer quickly, but before I answer, I forgot to say that I wish I were in Prague, because it is, people say it's the most attractive city in the world. Many people say that. I believe it is. Okay. Typically, when you hear, something is in a common, commonly known, it's often wrong. In this case, it's right. It is definitely the best city, the most beautiful physically, most beautiful, cute city. Anyway, so to answer you, are we worse off today than we were in 2008? Yes, and let me explain via skin in the game. All right. We had, what was the crisis in 2008? A lot of people made loans that they shouldn't have made. You agree? And a lot of people took loans, got in debt, something they shouldn't have done. Now, why is it that you and I and all the people who pay taxes are subsidizing them? Because not one of them was harmed, hardly harmed. The bankers were not harmed, nor were the borrowers, right? The foolish borrower and the foolish lender were not harmed. Who paid the price? We did. With government debt grew monstrously since, and we had low interest rate environment that hides the effect of government debt. So to take the United States, for example, during the last 10 years, we had a transfer from private debt to public debt. The same seems to have happened in many countries. Now, what does this mean, and across the globe? It means that you have a lot more vulnerability because your government was debt, okay? Particularly if you're not the one who issues the currency that people use in transaction, namely the dollar. But even then, you are. To give you something that is scary, I looked at the accounts of the last 12 months in the United States. We incurred about $800 to $900 billion of debt, additional debt, because we had deficit. Now, part of that deficit was something like 300 billion of debt servicing. Now, we're talking about interest rates being the last 12 months on average around 1 to 1.5%, okay, in the short term. And we're paying so much. So imagine if interest rate went up to the natural level, 2 to 3%. You had not only to pay interest on past debt that's higher, therefore your deficit would grow, but we'd have to pay interest, okay, on the what we borrowed, additional interest for we borrowed last 10 years, you see? So it would be a huge, just what I call the spiral. The death spiral usually comes in the form of someone having to borrow to pay interest on previous debt. You see? And we are going to be in that situation. Many governments are in that situation and being punished. So this is what's happening today, is the world is vastly more fragile because of this debt. Now, second point, an ETF, Bitcoin ETF. The whole point of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies is not speculation about that currency. You see, it should be using that currency for speculation, for investment, for other purpose, okay? Not to speculate, so that number one, the idea is defeats the purpose of a cryptocurrency, you see? I should be using a cryptocurrency to buy an ETF on whatever it is, on farmland, or an ETF on real estate, or ETF on something else. Not use my dollars to buy an ETF on cryptocurrency. That's the first one. And the second one is it makes Bitcoin more volatile than it is, and we don't want cryptocurrencies to be volatile. You see, because you cannot have a currency that is volatile. It's no longer a currency; it becomes a speculative item. You see, so I don't like the idea, both as an investor and both as a member of society, okay, with some idealistic views of what a cryptocurrency should be doing, namely hedge me, you see, not create more additional risks. So this is what I think about such ETF. Now, you cannot eliminate speculation, that's fine, but ETFs don't quite achieve that. And then finally, the whole idea of Bitcoin is how anonymous a transaction can be. So, and you defeat it completely by just like investing in an ETF, right? So, I mean, you lose all the point.
Hello, Nassim.
Yes.
When you take a look...
Raise your hand.
over here.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. So when you take a loan, when you borrow money, what you essentially are doing is borrowing from your future self. So that means that for the moment, you can spend, you can consume more than you produce. But the downside is that in the future, you have to consume less than you produce when you pay back the loan. So that creates like a business cycle in your own life when you take a loan. And as I see it, the problem is when you have the central banks centrally planning the interest rate. When the interest rate is low, it encourages like all of the people in society to borrow money, essentially borrowing from their future self. And when the central bank raises the interest rate, it means that all of the people in society at once, in sync, is forced austerity, basically. So that creates like a business cycle all over society that is in sync. That is my analysis of the situation. And do you think, if that is correct, and do you think that the sound, hard monetary system would correct that, where the central banks can't print new money, they can't manipulate the interest rate? Because like manipulation of the interest rate, lowering of the interest rate, and printing new money is basically two sides of the same coin, as I see it.
I agree with you. Basically, you said it. Let me tell you why I agree with you. And actually, I'm going to go even beyond. The first statement I'm going to make is that one has to be really a dumb bureaucrat to believe the story that debt helps society. Debt is something you should be used for emergency and contingency. It's a risk management tool, not a tool, you see? So I would go into debt if I have a broken leg, if I have an unforeseen calamity, if I have my house is on fire, maybe, okay, I would say someone can do that. But as a systematic way to go into debt, that is complete bogus. And the story that you fuel growth via banks is also bogus. It's something invented by bankers. And let me explain. I'm going to give you two examples of the last two successful spurts of technological and societal and economic advancement we've had in history. The most recent one is Silicon Valley growth, right? Silicon Valley, the revolution we had. and the previous one is the Industrial Revolution, okay? How much debt was there in any of them? Between 0 and 0, okay? And Warren Buffett in 2000 was bemoaning, right? He said, these people, they can't borrow 5 million from the bank, and they do an IPO for $2 billion, and they cannot borrow 5 million from the bank, right? So, because, and this is what makes, technology interesting and stable, is that there's no debt overhang on it, see? So, now people think that, of course there are forms of credit. You remember I was talking about letter of credit against shipments of merchandise. This is understandable. There are forms of debt that may work, for example, for young people to buy an apartment, right? That's fine. This is something that just makes inequality less painful in society. I mean, if the government's sort of like by giving these loans, maybe I can understand. So housing loans, and of course loans for calamities. If you have a problem, then you can borrow. But I do not understand that concept that you get growth via loans. What you get is pseudo growth. You get a mid-off style growth. Okay, you get a nice something that prints like growth. Because at any time you go into debt, you create growth, okay? So if someone was to do your GDP of your family, it would show increase and increase and increase and total collapse, you see? And that's not measured, debt-adjusted growth. So the first thing is people are making, and bankers have managed to make society believe that their lending is what causes growth, and not true. All right, I'm telling you, empirically not true. You can verify it, you can look at it, no matter how you look at it, and you have to be blind to believe it, because look at the businesses that have been successful. And even in traditional businesses, small businesses, the industries that are healthy where there's no generalized bailout, like small artisans, there's no loans, all right, initially. The people only lend to you when you stop growing, okay, when you're rich. So, second point, that the central banks, to show you how incompetent they were, they claimed, and how also, I mean, as if we can see through it, they claimed that the way we're going to save the situation is by putting interest rates at 0. Who can borrow at 0? The banks. All right, so it's subsidizing the banks. What else? They said it's going to stimulate, people starting businesses. Not true. You're settling people with debt. So in the format debt versus equity, the healthy format is equity, because debt makes any business very fragile and makes society fragile. And it's not like something new. We've known it since the Babylonians. Okay, the Babylonians had to have debt jubilees once in a while to restabilize society. So debt, I mean, you have two forms of debt. Basic emergency type debt is one thing, and a debt to fuel is another thing, and they don't work. And then another thing, that's quite central that people don't get is that monetary policy is not supposed to cure your problems. It's supposed to be an emergency measure. Now, for the last 10 years, they tried to cure a structural problem, namely, basically, this absence of skin in the game. That's how you have debt. The lender doesn't pay a price if he's wrong, and the borrower doesn't. So this is a skin in the game problem. This is how I got the idea to write this book. They do fail to realize, okay, that monetary policy is not a cure. No more than aspirin can be a cure for cancer, all right? If you have pains, cancer pains, it will help you. But don't consider it as a cure. You need a structuring as a cure to lower the debt burden on people via bankruptcy. That's but people are afraid of it.
Thank you very much. Hi, thank you for your presentation so far and your ideas. I would like to ask a question. You were speaking about a skin in the game concept, and we have an environment where we have elements who do not have skin in the game. So, speaking practically, what can you suggest us
as people who are kind of fed up with the free riders, with the people without skin in the game, would you suggest us as the strategy or actions that we can make these people without skin in the game have skin in the game, or you see the strategy in the long term to destroy these jobs or really get rid of the jobs without skin in the game? So what actions can we take?
Question. Basically, how can I remedy? We can, for example, finance now has skin in the game in the sense that hedge funds, everybody revises hedge funds, but hedge fund has skin in the game in the sense that the owner of hedge fund typically loses money, has half his wealth in the fund, whereas the other people 1%. So he loses 50 times more if something goes bad than the regular investor. You see, these are healthy structures. You take entrepreneurship as more skin in the game, visibly, but how can we have a society go more towards skin in the game? It's very simple. As you said, minimize decision making taken by people who never pay for their mistake. And this is very easy to do. Decentralization. That's the only solution. Small have no centralized, or if you centralize, make it for minimal things. And then, of course, there's a series of small little rules here and there that you can have. For example, have fewer regulation and more tort law. We have tort in America. We have a tort system. Tort system, if a corporation harms me, this is why I dedicated this book to Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader helped the law, the establish the laws for torts. So if a corporation harms me, I can sue that corporation. And typically the torts are given by citizens, so it's going to be very high. So if someone poisons, if a pharma company poisons me or poisons a lot of people, I can sue them for hundreds of millions of dollars. You see? So that is the best regulators. And what's happening is you have effectively now skin in the game on the part of companies, but not their executives, but on the part of companies. So that is much better than regulation, because regulation, we have noticed, tend to favor a certain class of people who benefit from these regulations. In foreign policy, visibly in non-interventionist foreign policy, that's it. Okay, unless you want to go to war, make sure your children or grandchildren, if you're a congressman, you're going to vote for war, make sure one of them isn't in battle. Believe me, that changes their mind very quickly about war. So small little tricks like that. I have rules here, for example. I have a very simple rule. I'm collecting small little rules because for questions like yours, one of them is, for example, can politicians who privately educate their children ethically take a policy position on state education? If you want to to be if you want more state education, well, visibly your children better be in a state school, not in a private school, for example. Another rule I have is if very simple rule that an academic, for example, can never be trusted in any decision that doesn't entail risk taking. Okay, simply because there's no contact, nothing. So you cannot trust. So it's not, the testimony is worthless. You have to have testimony by someone who has taken risks. Or sometimes very simple tricks, like the Brazilians lowered the rate of helicopter crashes in the army considerably by forcing the repair people to take helicopter rides. Very simple little tricks here and there with skin in the game can just improve, the symmetry and make things work better, simply because people have skin in the game.
You just mentioned the academics in the back.
Yes.
Thomas Sowell mentions in his book, Intellectuals in Society, basically says that intellectuals don't have skin in the game, and we have a big problem with the universities, university professors incurring a lot of pain on society and never, ever having any consequences from that. They never bear the pain. What can we do about that? How can we change that?
Well, the first thing is the academy, as our friend attended our risk workshop, only taught by people with skin in the game. the academy is collapsing as we're seeing it now. There have been some severe problems with academic, in other words, a lot of people now can study computer science without setting foot in a university. Okay, so we can't trust academics, and the practitioners are starting to show the upper hand. I mean, look in robotics, anything that involves real things. Okay, academia doesn't have any power. But as an intellectual, what do I mean as an intellectual? What's the idea of risk-taking? I've discovered one simple rule. I myself don't want to be intellectual. However, whenever I talk publicly, if there's no risk on my part, okay, there's a risk of bullshit. To eliminate it, you have to have risk-taking. See? In other words, a statement that doesn't speak truth to power and doesn't entail some kind of personal risk to me is empty. There's no signaling. See? It's exactly like if you talk war and you're not in battle, it doesn't count. And another thing I notice is that people understand value skin in the game. And I'm going to give you a very simple idea. My first book here in the inserto, Fooled by Randomness, the first book, was a book written, okay, it had some success, although no publicity, no good publisher, nothing. And I wondered why the people buying this book and they're not buying, hotshot authors. And then I realized what was going on. Because I was a trader, you see, not an academic, automatically people looked at me differently. So a failed businessman is worth 1 million academics. One single failed business person, because you can learn, you see. So, and society understands it, because for us, soldiers who have scars usually show off their scar. They're not like, the scar means that they lost to something. Well, visibly, yes, you're not God. But at the same time, it means that you took risks. You had contact with reality. There's something noble about someone who has scars. And academics not having scars are not credible to society, and particularly today, they're not credible anymore. This is why we have all this political turmoil. People are looking really, they're not happy, okay? They elect here some person, some other person, they got Trump, but they're not happy about something. What is it that they're not happy about? Well, visibly, they're not happy about these empty suits running their lives. And they express it in any possible way, just against the establishment, to be against the establishment.
Yeah, also when I talk to like economists and journalists and they say things like, oh, Bitcoin cannot work, I always ask, okay, so what is your short position? Did you do like 100x leverage? Did you put $10,000? You're going to be rich. And then I always ask them, okay, so let's bet on the future price or something. And they would never do it. They would say, oh, it couldn't work because I have this theory. But yeah, they never put in their own money. Why? Because if they're intellectuals, they can be rich like like no one else. But yeah, they never do it. It works 100% time. They never bet.
Yeah, that's, I mean, Paul Krugman, take Paul Krugman. He tell you, oh, look at Bitcoin is down 30%. Yes, you idiot. It's down 30%, but it's still up 1,000% from what you said it was overpriced. You see? You see? It was up. I mean, when Bitcoin was I think 30, he said it was overpriced. Okay? So, I mean, if he traded, he'd be bust. This is why I like skin in the game, because it eliminates from the system those who are incompetent. It doesn't keep them in the system. Just like, think of restaurants. If restaurants were judged by other restaurateurs or by the client rather than their clients, it's the same thing. That system cannot survive. All right.
Hi.
Great. So.
I was.
Thank you very much. Sorry, excuse me. I mean, we can do one more question.
Yes, let's do one more question and then we'll wrap up. So here it is.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on skin in the game in personal relationships, because
yes,
I think modern technology took out much of the skin in the game from relationships. We can behave horribly to other people and still live very safe and comfortable lives. Just dispose of the relationships that we've broken and nothing really happens.
Yeah, raise your hand to see you're in the back. No, oh, yeah, okay. So let me tell you what, the only thing I thought about is, why is it that you buy an engagement ring? And that engagement ring had to depend on how much it had to be something like 7 times your salary. Commitment, okay? You're making a commitment to others. So likewise, anything you tell people that doesn't entail some kind of cost is what we call empty signaling. You see, whether the gods don't like you to worship them without giving them a sacrifice a cow, or so there is signaling in effect. Now, in our modern society, true, you can be an asshole yet survive. You agree? But it doesn't really work that way. You can't be. I mean, you pay a price somewhere. I mean, in commercial transaction, you pay a price for being an asshole, even when it's anonymous. There's something about it that is detected. Okay. Likewise, if you are honorable, you're more liable to deal with because we don't live in a world, even in societies like where you think that people live off transactions, you have relations. Nothing is a single transaction. Nothing. Practically not, only in textbooks, only for economists things are single transactions. Everything is a relation, whether directly with one person or with a group of people. And then you have to behave in a certain way. So great. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation and great Q&A.